The Obama administration swapped out 5 members of the Taliban who were being held in Guantanamo for an American soldier who'd gone AWOL. Now, that American soldier deserved help regardless of how he went AWOL. It was a bad trade. The Trump administration outdid the Obama administration when they put 5,000 Taliban back on the battlefield because they were in a hurry to make a deal. Anytime a government is in a hurry to make a deal, all the other side has to do is sit back and let time work against them.
Chris, where does this podcast find you?
I'm at my house in Vegas.
You live in Vegas.
I'm willing to admit that.
So let's jump right into it. You tweeted recently, as a lead former hostage negotiator in the FBI, I will say with certainty that the level of manipulation by the mainstream media should not be overlooked when we look back on what exactly led to this moment. And you were referring to the failed attempted assassination of Trump. What did you mean by that?
Well, principally, I thought about when I put that up and also since, in point of fact, I believe the media are professional instigators. And it's sort of across the board. It's really become accepted in any interviews. Somebody sticks a microphone in somebody's face and said, "Can you believe so-and-so said this about you?" And it's a little bit like, I remember doing this when I was in college, trying to instigate a couple of my friends into getting into a confrontation. Can you believe that he said that? Are you going to take that?
Right.
This instigating that comes from the side. And if we have some reliance on the media overall, we don't think of them as instigators, then just like when I was whispering in my friend's ear, people say to themselves, yeah, that's right. And it's an incitement. Unfortunately, they're instigators. When I was with the FBI, we were preparing for a gathering of the G20 in Canada, I believe it was at the time. And they're talking about the preparations for the predictable demonstrations. And so in preparation for the crowd, they said, for the gathering, they said, you put 1,000 peaceful demonstrators someplace, 1,000. And then you just put 6 professional instigators around in strategic locations. And it'll take a peaceful demonstration and turn them into a violent mob. 6 people. And I've really been thinking about this a lot. Unfortunately, the media is professional instigators, and they look for the opportunity to pour gasoline on smoldering coals and hopefully turn it into a flame. And in point of fact, it's a contributing factor.
I like the framing there that they're in the business of instigating or taking the heat up, not taking it down. I would say that's the same as true online, but even worse. If I look at my comments in my feed on social media platforms, it feels like it's a bunch of people in the 3rd grade surrounding 2 kids who are barely even having words and then screaming, fight, fight, fight. And I wonder, and I'm curious what your thoughts are, that if I were a bad actor, a foreign entity, the GRU or the CCP, I would absolutely employ this strategy to just get us fighting with each other.
Yeah, well, we do it. It's kind of there are no Marcus of Queensberry rules on international combat. I mean, the intelligence agencies globally are always trying to stir up discontent within the camps of the enemy to keep them confused so that they don't get rallied against us.
So let's get back to how do you think the U.S. government should be negotiating with nations at war? What advice would you have? Biden has essentially said that he's going to focus a lot of his energy on his remaining time on trying to end the war in the Middle East and bring the hostages home. What advice would you have for him, or generally speaking, in the U.S. as it tries to negotiate with nations that they're at war?
Everything you've been doing up to now has been stupid. Unfortunately, argument has become a synonym for negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a horrible synonym. It shouldn't be there. People just want to make arguments. And that's advocated principally by lawyers. Lawyers want to make arguments. They call themselves negotiators. We don't have any better models in many cases other than lawyers that make arguments. And great negotiation is invisible, so you don't see it. The only time Biden ever did anything foreign policy-wise that I was really impressed by, and he did it very early in the administration, So what a government should do is not let the other side get caught off guard if you're going to say something they don't like. And Biden was going to make a statement recognizing the genocide of the Armenians, I believe, which is largely placed at the blame is placed at the feet of the Turks.
Mhm.
And what he did was he let the leader of Turkey know it was coming. We're going to say this. You're not going to like it. Don't want you to get caught off guard by it.
Mhm.
And the president of Turkey's response was remarkably muted. And professional instigators in the media said, "Can you believe he said that? What do you think about Biden saying this placing his blame on him?" And he'd been warned in advance. So he wasn't upset about it. It didn't turn into a flame that the media was trying to get it to turn into, the argument. The kids around the other kids in the schoolyard going, "Fight, fight, fight." So, and very few politicians have really taken a cue from that to, at least, if you're going to say something that your counterparts aren't going to like, then don't let them get caught off guard. At least don't blindside it. And I think that's probably the first move international. People want to be warned when bad news is coming. It's one of the basic tenets of the Black Swan method, day to day. I might have something negative to say. I want you to be able to brace yourself before I say it in advance. How do I do that where you don't feel attacked? How you feel is that I'm just trying to tell the truth. Again, to make analogy to what's going on in the media and social media today, there's a great seeking for truth. There's truth seekers and truth tellers. And a lot of people disguised as truth tellers are really just leveling accusations. But some of the people who have been around for a longer time are really just, let's stop the accusations. Let's start thinking about what's the truth here. Let's try to speak the truth. And if you can say it in the other way the other side is not offended by, then you're probably on the right track.
Something you said sort of resonates or I think has relevance with relationships. I've always thought that the thing that really puts a strain on relationships is not bad news, but surprises. Like it's one thing when, all right, the investments have gone really bad and you're in charge of the investments, but what I think people get really upset with is they've been bad for a year and they've been getting worse. You waited until now to tell me. Do you think a
Yeah.
lot of this it has relevance with personal relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. I see all this is relevant to personal relationships. And negotiation is relevant to personal relationships. We hear all the time, "Never Split the Difference" is a great parenting book. I hear back from women that for the first time, it feels like my husband's listening to me. And then, so first of all, what does it mean to actually listen? And then secondly, like, how do we eliminate the surprises from the other side? People are remarkably resilient and they're not getting caught off guard. And it doesn't take a lot. And fortunately, people blindside other people not out of bad intent because they don't know how to tell the truth, or they're trying to fix the problem so that it never hits the other person. So it's rarely is it as a result of a bad heart, if you will. These are mistakes of the head, not of the heart, because people just don't know. If I could just warn you it was coming, then you could brace yourself.
I want to put forward a thesis. I want to get back to geopolitics and have you respond to it. I think that not only when you're negotiating, you have to recognize you're not just negotiating on the current situation, but you're setting a tone or atmospherics or incentives for future negotiations.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the thing that just really bothered me about the Brittney Griner deal was I personally believe the moment we cut that deal and traded, it was loosely called or accurately called the Merchant of Death, Viktor Bout, that basically that day, Evan Gershkovich was taken prisoner, that we created an incentive structure that we would trade, quite frankly, someone more, I don't want to say valuable, but that had more, should have been in prison a lot longer, that we just set up an incentive such that we guaranteed more Americans would be falsely imprisoned. What are your thoughts?
Well, so first of all, Brittney Griner was absolutely entitled to have the U.S. government come to her aid.
Yep.
When I was the lead international kidnapping negotiator, and Brittney Griner's thing was an illegal detention as opposed to kidnapping. There are differences, but in any event, no American citizen should be abandoned overseas, no matter how they got themselves into it. In international kidnapping, people will mostly just do it. ill-advised behavior. They were putting themselves in really bad positions, trying to trade on a form of camaraderie internationally that was never there. And I don't believe that Brittney Griner, she may have made a minor mistake, but she's entitled to have the government come to her aid and do everything it can for her. So first point there. I'm absolutely in support of the government helping her. So now let's get on to the stupidity of the trade. Once the instigators got going in the media, then increased pressure on the Biden administration. Cut a deal, cut a deal, cut a deal. Then it's a matter of patience. When the other side is more patient than you are, and the instigators are putting the heat on you, then they can lay back. And I don't think I think it was a poor trade. I think, and I don't think the Biden administration has got the market, is holding the monopoly on bad trades. The Obama administration made bad trades. The Trump administration made bad trades. I thought it was horrible that I thought they beat us in the deal when the AWOL soldier, the Obama administration swapped out 5 members of the Taliban who were being held in Guantanamo for an American soldier who'd gone AWOL. Now, that American soldier deserved help regardless of how he went AWOL. It was a bad trade. The Trump administration outdid the Obama administration when they put 5,000 Taliban back on the battlefield because they were in a hurry to make a deal. Anytime a government is in a hurry to make a deal, all the other side has to do is sit back and let time work against them. And so the Brittney Griner thing was no different. It was a bad trade. And then the nature of the bad trade, not the nature of the fact that a trade was made. The nature of the bad trade is what encouraged the poor negotiation, which sets up further negotiations. One of my favorite movies, Bridge of Spies, Tom Hanks.
Love it.
We engage in the same kind of trades. And as portrayed in the movie, the American negotiator, depicted by Tom Hanks, got the better of the other side. And got the better of the other side in the Russians. Same type of trade. It wasn't that the negotiations were bad. It was how good were the negotiators at the table. And not only did Tom Hanks' character, and forgive me for not remembering the real life name of the guy, who I have tremendous admiration for, he turned around and cut great deals with Cuba, getting massively. We beat the hell out of the Cubans in the negotiations after the Bay of Pigs. So it's not negotiation itself that's the problem. It's the level of ability of the negotiators at the table.
The negotiation everyone's talking about is the negotiation with Putin and the negotiation with Hamas, right? Well, if I think of the 2 highest profile negotiations, maybe that's through an American-centric lens. But one with Putin, you have an autocrat who's not worried about not being reelected, and you have a nation that has just, as a competence, an incredible ability to endure hardship and suffering. It's just, I find in terms of Russian history, it's shown it's pretty difficult to put pressure on Russia. They don't scare easily. They're willing to put their own people through a lot of pain and suffering here. So I'd love to get your thoughts there. And then as it relates to Hamas, I even see a bigger challenge, and that is you're not even sure who you're negotiating with or how you even open lines of negotiation and who can even enforce the rules or outcomes of that negotiation. I'd love to give your thoughts or get your thoughts on both of those dynamics.
I would agree with some of what you said about Putin and Russia. I mean, I think the guy does worry about getting reelected, which is why he puts so much effort into it. I don't think that Russians would agree if you said that the elections were rigged. They support him openly. He's a nationalist, and globally, nationalists are gaining a lot of influence. Populist nationalist leaders, that are 1,000% in favor of what's in the best interest of our country. It's sweeping Europe. It's the reason that Trump is as popular as he is. He's pro his homeland. Russia has shown the ability to endure. What have they had to endure? They've been invaded more times than they've invaded other countries. They've been
Yeah,
invaded by Japan multiple times. They've
yeah.
been invaded by various European countries multiple times. They've been invaded more than they've invaded other countries. They don't have the natural land barriers, geographical protections the United States had. We got the most envious, geographical setup on Earth. You cannot come at us without us either seeing you or you having to cross some ridiculously difficult terrain. Can't come at us from the north, the east, or the west. Can't come at, if you want to try to come at us from the south, you got to work your way through Latin America. There aren't great ports down there. Russia, on the other hand, has got land bridges that makes it extremely easy to get at it. Their natural resources are not high. I read at the beginning of the Ukraine war that somebody dismissively of Russia said, Russia's just Europe's gas station. All right, empathy. How does that look to the other side?
I think that was McCain.
It might have been. All right, so if that's true, you're the leader of a country that your principal way to feed your people is an industry the entire world is trying to stop using. So empathy is about not necessarily agreeing with the actions of the other side, but understanding where they're coming from and being able to say it to them out loud. Nobody has, the Western European leaders, the president of France showed up and had audiences with Putin. I promise you that all that guy did, if they got a direct meeting with him, was tell him why he was wrong, as opposed to, all right, so here's what your problems are. You get invaded, you got no natural defenses, you're worried about whether or not you can feed your people, you're worried about your people starving in the cold and the dark. Let's talk about what the problems are and a different solution. But nobody's approaching them like that. So I think what Russia's done in regards to Ukraine is absolutely wrong. War is an environmental catastrophe, let alone a humanitarian catastrophe. But a little bit starts with, all right, so here's your motivations. Here's why you're doing what you're doing. Now let's potentially talk about a different course of action. Because as soon as you start talking to somebody about what their motivations are, getting it out in the open air, it helps them clear their head and maybe see war is a short-term catastrophe, whereas economic collaboration is a long-term solution. So that's kind of my take on Russia. Now, and as I continue to babble on, there's a massive amount of influence on Hamas through Qatar. All the negotiations are currently going on through there. Some of the Hamas leaders are hanging out at Qatar.
Yeah, they're there.
And there's if you really want to talk to Hamas, even if you're an American diplomat, you're going to Qatar. So there's ways to influence them. The real difference, in my view, and I was listening to Jared Kushner giving an interview about the Abraham Accords, and the problem with Hamas and why they didn't participate in the Abraham Accords, and the pro-Palestinian peoples were saying, well, we weren't given a seat at the table. You could have had a seat at the table if you'd have paid table stakes. And table stakes for that negotiation was everybody that comes to the table gets to keep their job. You cannot come to the table saying, I'm going to put you out of business. You have to agree that the other side gets to keep their job. Hamas has not been willing to say the Israelis get to keep their job. All the Abraham Accords, all the Sunni Muslim countries that signed off to collaborate with Israel, they all said, you know what? If you're willing to negotiate with me in peace and look for an economic settlement where we can all thrive, you get to keep your job. And Hamas has not been willing to say that. And it's not that they haven't been invited to the table. It's they've refused to pay the table stakes.
And in this case, the table stakes are when you say get to keep your job, you mean saying that we're not gonna be totally 100% committed to exterminating your people? Is that what you're referring to as table stakes?
Yeah. And even in even larger terms, that's the first time the United States has been willing to make that agreement. When the second Iraq war started, and it's easy to criticize it in hindsight. It's a bad move, and I'm not going to go there. But I do remember President Bush giving an address to the American people and saying, "This is the opportunity to bring democracy to the Middle East." And what he didn't know that he was saying at the time was he was saying to all the Middle Eastern leaders, none of whom are democracies, my goal is for you to lose your job because you're not a democracy and you're going to have to subject yourself to the whims of the votes, just like all the Western European countries do and everybody else. And if you want to collaborate with us, we're going to bring democracy to your country. You're going to lose your job. And that was a mistake. So the other thing about the brilliance of the Abraham Accords and the approach in that particular negotiation was the agreement: you get to keep your job if you come to the table and negotiate with us in good faith. And so it's obvious with Hamas, but America has made this mistake a number of times in the past. We didn't realize what we were saying. I want to bring democracy to your country, your monarchy. The person on the other side is hearing, I'm going to lose my job. Why should I do that?
Well, let's get back specifically to Biden has said he wants to bring the hostages home. My understanding is there's still 5 Americans being held hostage. I'm not even sure we understand there's proof of life or not, but obviously it's a priority for, the American government to get those 5 hostages home. Let's go back to that. What advice or what are the atmospherics here to try and successfully bring these folks home?
So first of all, if I could say, when I was a hostage negotiator, our opening principles were you can't negotiate in the middle of a riot or a gunfight. And it looks very much like the gunfight's still going on. So to expect effective negotiations in the short term in the middle of a gunfight, you got to get the gunfight stopped. Now, what's the inducement for either side to stop the gunfight? Ultimately, it's the people that are supporting them, the economic harm of violence, as opposed to the economic prosperity of peace. And Hamas continues to stay in the gunfight because of the support they're getting globally. They're winning the PR war. They're intentionally putting their people in harm's way. I don't think we're getting accurate reports in the media of how tired the Palestinians are of being human shields for Hamas and getting their people killed. They got a hostage rescue in a residential area, and all sorts of quote innocent people are killed by the Israelis that come in on the hostage rescue. Well, how did those innocent people get placed in harm's way? Hamas is sacrificing Palestinians by the tens of thousands to gain world support, and they're getting that world support. So, what are the kids standing around them shouting and yelling? There's the Biden administration. They're challenging getting the hostages back is to calm the rancor that's blaming Israel for a current bloody conflict that they didn't start. That begins to change the perspective of the leadership. Are they winning the PR war? Hamas is winning the PR war right now. That's what's keeping them engaged in what they're doing.
I'd love your thoughts on how to take some of these skills and apply them to your relationship with your spouse. And then I'd love to hear, do you have kids, Chris?
Now I get grandkids.
You got grandkids. Okay. I would love specifically to hear lessons to your younger self or a new father on how you can apply these skills to enhance your relationship with your kids.
Wow. Uh, okay. Where do we begin? There was a lot of good
Yeah,
stuff there.
it goes from Hamas to more unreasonable third parties when we're talking about teenagers. But let's start with using this as a means of establishing better rules of engagement with your spouse.
Well, here's a problem with spouse and children. We've conditioned them that we're not listening. So parents and spouses, we want to flip over to either continue to ask our list of questions to make it sound like we're listening and interested, or giving advice. And a lot of moms start to report that the use of the mirroring skill got their teenage daughters to talk to them for the first time in years. So what's a typical interaction? Kid comes home from school. How was your day? Kid answers. Parent goes immediately to the next question. Well, what that makes a kid feel like is that they weren't listened to. Now, a parent is taught show interest. I got a checklist to show interest so I can get back to my life. It's like a person in the media doing an interview. They got a list of questions. They're going to run through the questions. They're not going to pay attention to the answers. And then they're going to move on. So how was your day? Kid's been conditioned that mom or dad ain't going to listen. So they're either going to say fine or I forget. because they're not going to get interrogated over that. I forget is the best one. I forget. What did you learn? I forget. And then we move on. Well, and the parent's like, why won't my kid talk to me? Well, you got your list of questions. You ain't listening. You've conditioned them that you're not going to listen. The people in our family, we've conditioned each other that we're not listening. So the tiny little 2 millimeter shift that moms are telling us constantly. How was your day? I forget. If you're going to mirror that, what'd you say? You forget? Not accusatory, but to just repeat what the person said confirms that you heard and you listened. And suddenly the child's shocked, like, wait a minute. You actually paid attention to what I said? And by the second time they do that, suddenly the kid's opening up. All mom or dad is doing is mirroring.
And just as we wrap up here, Chris, what do you think are the 2 or 3 things that young people should keep in their back pocket as it relates to negotiating, whether it's for a salary or for, a different type of job responsibilities, whatever it might be? Are there any sort of go-tos you'd say, look, this is what young people get wrong a lot and they should remember whenever they're in a situation that involves some type of negotiation?
Yeah, if you can show the other person by saying out loud what their perspective is, that seems like a tangent, inefficient, but just repeating back to them what their perspective is breaks log jams. And here's the thing, you don't even got to get it right. If you just make the attempt, the other side's going to feel you're collaborating and they'll correct you. They'll help you get it right. You go into instantaneous collaboration. And it doesn't matter what the negotiation is. It could be with your boss. It could be with your parent. You know how they see things. Saying how they see it is not agreement. And you're going to find that a lot of your log jams are just going to disappear. Half of them, I promise you, will go away the minute you start trying to repeat what you think the other side's perspective is.
Chris Voss is CEO of the Black Swan Group and the author of the national bestseller, Never Split the Difference, Negotiating as If Your Life Depended on It. He previously served as the lead international kidnapping negotiator for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, as well as the FBI's hostage negotiation representative for the National Security Council's Hostage Working Group. Before becoming the FBI's lead international kidnapping negotiator, Chris served as the lead crisis negotiator for the New York City division of the FBI. He joins us from his home in the great and underappreciated city of Las Vegas. Chris, I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for your good work and your service.
Scott, thank you very much.